For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Tabi Shomolikai, folklore expert and research associate at the University of Cape Town. José Manuel De Prada-Samper joins me to unpack his book titled Fading Footprints in Search of South Africa's First People. Your book, Fading Footprints, traces your journey into the magical folklore of the Zem hunter-gatherers of the Upper Karoo. So can you talk to us about the research involved? I understand you used anthropological journals and also had engagements with some of the inhabitants.
Yes, my research evolved over time, as explained in the first chapter of the book, which the book is quite also an explanation or a story about how I did the research. So I began discovering this 1911 book. I was fascinated by the stories I had found. So for many years, I worked just in a library in Barcelona, later at Columbia University in New York in the States. But I always longed to go to the places where these stories had been told. And this couldn't happen only, as explained in the book, in 2005, when I visited with archaeologist Jeanette Deacon the region where these people came from. And previously I had been in Cape Town and I had seen the original manuscripts of the 19th century research that had generated that archive, that had produced those stories in writing as we have them now. So yes, I went from the books and articles and photocopies of the manuscripts to see the manuscripts themselves and then see the landscape where these stories came from. And that was mind blowing to be in the landscape. And for many years, I was visiting that landscape that the archaeologists had identified where these people came from. But it didn't occur to me at first to do interviews of the people, to engage with the locals, except for the farmers, because in that everything is owned by someone in that area, in that part of the Northern Cape. So you have to come to the farmhouse and to negotiate with the landowner. I'm doing this, blah blah blah. I want to see the rock art. I want to see the archaeology. But then I saw the people that work for these farmers. I saw the people in the townships in Kennard, in Brandfley, and other places I visited. And they looked to me like very much like the people in the photographs of the storytellers that had given the stories in the 19th century to Willem Blake and Lucy Lloyd. So, but my first interviews really successful didn't happen until 2011 when I went in March to see the landscape change during the rain season. And I had the opportunity to interview some of the folks there. And again, it was a mind-blowing experience because what I heard from them was not what I expecting to hear. So that's more or less how the research evolved in time.
Talking about your trip to the Northern Cape, Jose, what are some of the odd stories you found were still being told by the folklore?
I was expecting to find stories of people telling me about how hard was living in that landscape of trouble and hardship and that kind of thing. I was more asking stories of the personal experiences of the people, because the idea we had, everybody at that time, including myself, was that the folklore was dead, because someone had said a century before that the folklore was dead. But people were very willing to tell me stories. That was something that initially I wasn't expecting, because race relations in that area had been always very difficult. And people had reason to distrust strangers, especially a foreigner and a non-South African just popping out of the blue there and asking them about their lives and so on. But I was lucky in the sense that we were in these situations in Brandfley and then in a farm called Farkens, in which it helped us, a group that we formed, my wife, myself, and Neil Rush, to really engage in really friendly connection with local people. And we could help them in some ways. We could give a lift to a woman who was in the farm and needed to go to town and so on. So that kind of help. So we were granted really very graciously the possibility of listening to their experiences and to their stories. Initially, it was stories about the water snake, the water animal, which is a very strong figure in that area. And I knew already that there was still alive a lot of folklore of that kind But it was in Branfley when we interviewed two sisters from the Fansale family, that stories which were much older than one would have expected to find there at that time, or as we believed then, that began to pop up. And we were told the story of a grandmother who had been almost fed to the lions by her family. And that resonated with the story recorded in the 19th century. And that I realized that it was not a European story in any way, or a Bantu story, or it was very local kind of oral tradition, and that was like an epiphany for me. It was a revelation.
And how did you gain the trust of some of the community members, given the complex and painful history of their racial relations in that part of the country?
Well, yes, it was that we were lucky at first, that we could be of help. In Branfley, we engaged the Fansale family to do real dancing. Real dance is a tradition in that area of the Northern Cape and also on the Western Cape, among rural communities of people of Khoisan descent. So we engaged them in our bed and breakfast to come and dance for us, and that's how we connected with that family. And we said, well, we are now going to see this farm, but if we could later come to you and we could have a conversation. And the people who were pointed to us as good as storytellers said, okay, it's fine with us. And then in the farm itself, as I said before, we could give a lift to someone who needed to come to Branfley and was stuck there. And that helped. I mean, it created the right atmosphere that when we could ask, could we come and talk to you? And so, and then when you have contacts and then once you know people in a given area, then it's easier. They introduce you to other people. So from then on, it was much easier. And I always try to find mediators in a given area, maybe a schoolmaster, or maybe the dominie or someone. There's always someone who has good connection with the community and can help people like me who are looking for that kind of information.
Also, Jose, can you tell us about the experiences of Janji Van Roy and the others in the Karoo who have lost their homes and their jobs, and how this showed that the communities in the Karoo are now at another difficult juncture of their history?
Well, yes, that's a very sad aspect of the story. And that's the note with which my book finishes, because, that area is a semi-desert. The Karoo is even harsher than the Kalahari. And the only way really you can farm there, it's with sheep. It's rearing sheep, and you need a lot of land for that, and you need a lot of water. And so you cannot divide the land there, because only if you can divide a big farm in I don't know, in 10 pieces, only the piece that has the water will really be successful. So I think there's in some cases, some land has been given to local people, but it's still very much owned by the descendants of the early settlers there in that area. And it's a very devastated, in the sense of the ecology of the animals, of the plants, a very devastated area. And now I could see some, I think, illegal diamond mining operations there at some point. And then there's been discussions about fracking and so on. So, and the area is becoming, because the planet is becoming drier and drier everywhere, and in an area which is drier in itself from the start. So the situation now is not really good for the people. And in many cases, people have been kicked out of the farms because of fears that they could claim the property. So, and they ended up in the township. So really, these people who were the ancestors were the owners of that land, and they were as explained in the book, reduced to poverty and to ignorance, and they were turned into serfs, as in a feudal system. But at least they had a connection with the land. But I think they are in now having the risk of even losing that connection. They will maybe have to migrate to big cities where also the prospects are not very good. So it's all together the history of the area from the mid 18th, 19th century to now. It's really very sad.
And talk to us about why you are so infatuated with Bushman literature and oral literature.
Well, since early age, like a very bookish person. So at some point, I decided I wanted to study comparative literature. And I studied here in Barcelona English language and literature. And I was for that kind of literary work, research, literary criticism, and so on and so forth. But then I discovered this book in 1986. And it was also a revelation in itself, and so I became gradually to become interested in oral literature, in folklore, and especially in those stories that come from the Upper Karoo in the Northern Cape in South Africa. So eventually, I changed my course, my vocation as a literary scholar turned into more on a folklore scholar. And that's it. I mean, I am interested in oral literature, and I've done fieldwork also in Spain, and I've done a book about a traditional storyteller in northwest Spain. But really, my vocation, my main focus of interest is this Blake and Lloyd collection, and initially only the manuscripts, the so to speak, the dead letter of people that were considered then to be extinct, and then since 2011, when happily in a happy turn, I found out that the people were not extinct at all. Now it's the history and the culture of the living communities that interest me.
And in your book, Jose, you noted that there was no acknowledgement or an apology or an attempt to ameliorate the plight of the Zem survivors' descendants. So, why do you think this is the case?
It's a very complex situation that we have here. Why this genocide is so little known in South Africa? Actually, a series of genocides, because it happened in other parts of South Africa, and my research focused there on the Northern Cape and on the Upper Karoo, south of the Orange River. But it happened north of the river. It happened in the Transvaal. It happened in the Eastern Cape. It happened everywhere, and it was not only white farmers exterminating the hunter-gatherers because they saw them as an obstacle to their appropriating the land and so on. So, but this story is like vaguely known, but it's not specifically known. I mean, in a sense that it may create an awareness that this has happened. So, since I began my research, I've been trying to create that awareness, trying also to elucidate the history of this area via documents in the Cape Town Colonial Archives and so on. So I'm trying to get this into the consciousness of the country and of humanity in general, because it's horrible what happened here. But we live very difficult times even now. So it's very difficult to achieve. I mean, there has to be a political willingness to acknowledge what happened and to do something about it. But I don't see it happening in the short term, really.
And lastly, Jose, what are you hoping people take away after reading your book?
Well, I think my idea for the book, the reason why I wrote it is to make all this known. I mean, all the aspects of this story, which are, in some cases, they are overwhelmingly sad and terrible, and others that are more inspiring of hope, of cooperation between people who are very different. And I want people to get an aspect of South African history that is very little known. And yes, an understanding that this is not really something that marginally happened in a remote corner of the world, but it's a matter of conscience. I hope that people will build on this book. Some people will read it more for information, which is okay, but I hope other people will find reasons to pursue other lines of research, because there is a lot to learn about the events and the history that is offered in the book. So I hope it may be the seed for more.
That was José Manuel De Prada-Samper speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about fading footprints in search of South Africa's first people.